good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming along this evening to listen to me talk for half an hour or so. I've had a conversation with Alan, and we've agreed that what I'll do is just, as he said earlier, give you an overview of my career in photography, where it started and where it is now. I've about 60 slides, so I think if I can whiz through those, that would be about half an hour to 45 minutes, and then we could either have some questions and hopefully some answers part way through, or you can either wait to the end and we can talk then. Sean's going to monitor the chat. I won't be able to see the chat when I'm presenting, so if he gets a sort of set of questions together, he's going to stop me, and we'll have an in conversation at that point. So here we go. Right. Okay, so that's where it started in 1967. My dad bought me a Kodak Instamatic. I was 3 years old, so if you do your maths, I was born in 64, and started taking photographs. That wasn't my first camera. I can't remember actually what the first camera was that I was in the picture with earlier, but the first one that allowed me to control anything was this one, an Instamatic 25, and the life then was either very bright or not very bright, and that was it. That was the only control. There was no focus. I certainly didn't have any flash cubes to put in that hot shoe on the top. And all photographs were square, and I still love the square format. So they're sort of my photographs from my early years. Loch Shiel, some shot of Snowdon, and a cairn, chambered cairn near Inverness. And even looking back at these photographs now, I really like the grain and the tonal range in them, and the composition as well. So I'm still quite happy with them. I certainly wouldn't put them in for a distinction, but I'm still quite proud of them. So through school, I eventually decided to do an O-level in photography. The bug bit at the age of 3, and I haven't lost that excitement for photography since then. Photography wasn't offered as a subject at school, so I had to teach myself photography. Or photography for O-level anyway, and the books of Michael Langford, starting with basic photography and then advanced photography, were the most important texts at that time, and they remained that until I went to art college later. So this photograph was one that I did for my O-level project, and it was a photo series on the cattle market at Newark, which is no more. It's now been sold, and it's going to be an aviation training school for the theory side. They're not going to land planes in the middle of Newark. So these are some more of those photographs from my O-level. I don't know whether I'm supposed to be admitting people, but I'll just click on them if I see them, Sean. So everything was black and white then for me, for the O-level. It was all on film, Kodak Tri-X, processed in bathroom, because the school didn't have a dark room. So I used to take over the family bathroom in the evening and work in there until the early hours. I'd set up a couple of old pallets on the bath, and I don't know whether anybody remembers the Patterson dark room in a box, but it was a very basic enlarger with 3 trays and 2 pairs of tongs and some chemicals, and that was it. It was a very easy thing to set up, but a very difficult enlarger to get even tone across the image. It would always darken the edges because of the vignetting of the Patterson. I think they even called it the Paternar lens, which was a 50mm f3.5 lens, but it didn't have very good coverage. So the edges, the corners would be slightly blurred and they'd be dark, which is, I think, why I tend to sort of vignette a little bit on all my photographs today. I just sort of grew up with it. So once I'd done my O-level in photography, I set to with my A-levels, and I was encouraged to do chemistry, physics and biology, which I absolutely hated, and all I wanted to do was photography. I wasn't able to do photography A-level because you needed dark rooms that we hadn't got at school and that I couldn't set up at home. So I looked to the RPS and decided to do my licentiateship and instead of an A level, because at that time, when you were applying for art college through ADAR, which was the Art and Design Admissions Registry, if you had an LRPS was equivalent to an A level. So I thought, well, that'd be great. If I can get an LRPS, that's one less science A level that I need to get through with. And it worked. So I got my LRPS, and that was really the door opening to go to art college. So I want you to remember the photograph on the left, because that style and that approach reappears a bit later on. I'll flag that up. So I went with my LRPS for interview at Blackpool College. I was interviewed by a guy called Roger Goodwill, who I know Alan knows. He sat there leaning back on his office chair, smoking his pipe. The office was full of tobacco smoke, and I emptied my portfolio onto the floor. And he said, right, he said, my advice to you is whenever you go to interview, don't take so much work, put it away. So I thought, oh dear, that's not good. So I gathered all my work in, put it back in the folio, and was just about to leave the office after such few words. And he said, oh, we'll give you an unconditional offer. Look forward to seeing you in September. So that was it. That was fantastic. I was going to go to Blackpool College, which in those days was the place to go to study photography. It was Blackpool, Bournemouth, and Newport, Gwent. So those three were the three places, and Blackpool was the one I wanted to go to. It was a little bit of a mistake, perhaps looking back, because my interests were definitely in editorial photography, not advertising and fashion. So I was always perhaps swimming against the tide at Blackpool, because it was very heavy on advertising work. So people would go from Blackpool, usually to London, and start working as an advertising photographer. I wanted to go from Blackpool to start working as an editorial photographer. So a bit of a challenge. But anyway, while I was there, I decided that I'd do my associateship. I stayed in the RPS and have been in since the age of 16. So I did my ARPS in the applied section, using work that I was producing commercially while I was at college. Leaving college, as I said, Blackpool sort of trained you to be advertising and commercial photography. That was the sort of prime output from Blackpool. So I went into advertising photography and specialised in confectionery. So I moved to York, where we'd got Cravens, Terry's, and what was then Rowntree Mackintosh, and became Nestle eventually. And I joined their advertising services department there, which was a great training ground, probably as good, if not better, than Blackpool for training you how to light. When we'd got things like the black magic egg on the right there, with gold foil on the outer, you'd got gold foil on the egg itself, you've got a satin bow, all needed to be lit. So we had all sorts of metal bits around. You can see at the bottom there, the sort of mirrored surfaces to get light in there. And we were working with continuous light. So we'd often use plastic eggs rather than chocolate eggs, for obvious reasons. The Eclipse egg never actually made it to market, or not in a big way anyway. But it was nice chocolate, was that one. Black Magic I wasn't struck on. But this, I was 2 years at Rowntree Mackintosh, and in 1987 I had to take this photograph for an export magazine spread for Rowntree Export, and I hated doing this shot. And it was this photograph that showed me that I didn't really, or told me that I didn't really want to stay in advertising services, and I needed to get out. So I was living in York at the time, and a job came up advertising the back pages of the Guardian and the arts pages for a photographer at York Archaeological Trust. So I left a good salary, left a car, all at Rowntree Mackintosh, and went to work for this little archaeological unit in Old Walk in York. So So that I swapped a really high-tech studio that was just beginning to venture into digital for a dirty old dark room in the basement of a university building that it had at the bottom of Old Walk. This was one of my first shots there, which was an area excavation in Old Walk, which I think Abhijit, I heard Abhijit earlier. I think Abhijit, I think you live pretty much over the top of this. I think you live in Old Walk, if memory serves me correctly. You might tell me later, but I think this is probably under your house or under the houses that you live in. And we had to hire all sorts of things to get the shot that we needed. Aerial shots were particularly difficult in a built-up area, so we used to hire these cranes with a bucket on the end. Nowadays, of course, you just put a drone over the middle of it, take it up vertically, do the shot, and bring it down. Be much easier, but not then. So you certainly didn't need to mind heights. But there was still studio work to do. Just as I'd sort of honed my skills at studio work at Rowntree Mackintosh, I had to use the same skills at York Archaeological Trust to photograph things like these Viking Age coins, the die on the left that they used to stamp the coin, and the lead piece at the back, which is a trial piece. And these were excavated in Coppergate, which is where the York Viking Centre was ultimately built, in the hole that this excavation left. And there's a link there later on to how my career developed in a different direction. But this, by far and away, was the most exciting artifact that I photographed at York Archaeological Trust. It was an Anglo-Saxon helmet from the same archaeological excavation at Coppergate in York. The Coppergate excavation went on for several years. We had all sorts of VIP visitors. The Prince of Wales came, Magnus Magnusson, I don't know if you remember Magnus from what's the Mastermind. And he came, and he ultimately became the voice of Jorvik when he narrated the visitor tour for Jorvik. But when the excavation finished, all sorts of material was found and went into the post-excavation program. But this hadn't been found. It was a few days after the site closed that the JCBs were in there digging out the hole, thinking all the archaeology had gone. And this helmet, this Anglo-Saxon helmet, it's not a Viking helmet, although it was in a Viking excavation, but it was at the bottom of a deep pit. This was brought out on the end of a JCB, and the JCB went through the top of the helmet and damaged it. So it was a couple of years in conservation before it looked like this. And that was a very exciting artifact to photograph. Recently, I went back to the York Archaeological Trust because they opened an exhibition called Archaeology Through the Lens, which was looking at the history of archaeological photography in York during the time for the York Archaeological Trust, which was founded in 1972. So we're coming up next year to its 50th anniversary. And I met my old boss, which is Peter Addiman, pictured here, at the exhibition. And Peter and I have kept in touch since I left the trust about 30 years ago. This in the exhibition is a photograph of Peter that I took. That's the photograph top left. And I never knew at the time, and I never knew until I went to see this exhibition a couple of weeks ago, that somebody had photographed me photographing Peter at the bottom left. Now, on the next shot, this is a bit of exercise for you. Got to spot the difference on these photographs. I mean, it's 30 years since Peter was my boss, but I sent him a copy of the photograph, the one on the left, and he emailed me back saying, "Oh, fantastic photograph, lovely to see you again. Shame we don't look as young now as we did then. And by the way, could you change the colour of my tie?" Now, there was no way on earth I could have done that 30 years ago when we were shooting on film, not without it costing a lot of money for retouching. But of course, in Photoshop, you can do it very quickly. So he said that his son, Tom, who's also an archaeologist, said, "Oh, Dad, it's a real shame you weren't all wearing burgundy tie." The old photograph, me and him. So that's what I had to do. So 30 years since he was my boss, and he's still telling me what to do. Anyway, he was pleased with the result. We also got to talk about the Royal Photographic Society and how I become president. And he told me that a relative of his, Major General James Waterhouse, had been president of the society from 1905 to 1907. So I Googled him. He's on Wikipedia, so you can go and have a look for him, and found this book, The Waterhouse Albums, which a copy arrived this week. And I found that he was an RPS member from 1873 to 1922, but not only that, he won or was awarded the Progress Medal, which is one of the highest awards, the medal awards that the RPS gives. He died in 1922, so it's the centenary of his death next year. So we're planning to celebrate that and commemorate. I think you commemorate a death, don't you? Don't celebrate a death. So we're looking to do that next year, and hopefully Peter will be able to be involved with that. And it's the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Archaeological Trust, so I'm hoping we can do something together. So while I was at the Archaeological Trust, I decided to go and try for my FRPS. And at the time, most of the photographs that I took at the Trust would end up in something called the Fascicule series, which was the Archaeology of York, and it's published in a series of sections. Each section has its own volumes. And it had a rather uninspiring cover, which is the one on the left. And I managed to persuade them to have a full colour cover, which in its own right was quite a step forward for them, but to have a wraparound cover. And that formed the basis of my fellowship. So the RPS distinctions have been really important to me right through my career. My LRPS got me into art college. My ARPS that I did at art college got me a job. And then when I was in this job, I used the work that I produced there to gain my fellowship in the applied category. So this is one example from the portfolio. I think we had to do 18 or was it 20 photographs then? I think you have to do more now for a fellowship than you did in 1991. But my fellowship was a series of photographs. All of them ended up in print for different publications. So this one, for example, was the front of an Ordnance Survey map on Roman and Anglian York. And there's another one that we did on Viking and medieval York as well. And if you remember, I asked you to keep this photograph in mind, the one of the skull in the moving waters, which I did for my LRPS. I just thought it was a lovely sort of circular thing to happen, that I managed to use the same technique for a cover of a book of animal remains with this beaver skull. Now this beaver skull photo, the skull, sorry, the human skull in the water was actually a model skull from my biology class at school. But the beaver skull came from the environmental archaeology unit at York. And I don't know why we decided to go and photograph this up on Fylingdales. We could have found a stream somewhere nearer to home. But anyway, we decided to go to Fylingdales, just under where the early warning thing is, the big golf balls, or they're now pyramids. We parked up at the side of the road, walked down to the stream, which is called Ella Beck, and put the skull in there, upside down to photograph it on a time exposure. I think this was a Nikon F3 on Kodachrome. Anyway, we'd only been there sort of 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and two policemen started walking down the bank towards us and asked us what we were doing and that we weren't allowed to be there. Anyway, thankfully, one of the policemen was a keen photographer, so we explained, and he said, oh, well, make sure you're quick then and then get out of here. So we carried on, but just at that moment, the skull fell off the rock and slid into the water, and the teeth fell out. So we managed to find the teeth, and we could not get them to stay in. And we were thinking, have we got bubble gum? Have we got anything that we could do? So we flagged down a lorry that came by, and this is absolute truth. We stopped the lorry and said, look, we're doing this. We've lost the teeth. We need to keep them in the skull. Have you got any bubble gum or anything like that that we could use to keep these teeth in? And he said, oh, I can do better than that, mate. So he got out of his van, walked to the back, opened the door, and he'd got a lorry full of every different type of adhesive you could think of. And he said, take your pick. So I think we got a small mastic gun and used that, and then had to confess to the conservation lab that we used this very conservation unapproved glue to put the teeth back in. But it was a successful photograph, made for a good cover, and also made it into my panel. And I've still got my FRPS panel in the studio here, and that's the box that I sent it in. I can't imagine anybody now sending their fellowship application in a battered old cardboard box that they bought suspension files in. But that's what I sent mine in. There are 18 prints you needed then, so I think you need 20 now. So I sent 18 prints. They were all Cibachrome prints, printed in the dark room at the Trust. And Cibachrome was an Ilford product with almost like a mirror-like finish to the prints. They're absolutely rich colour. And if you were shooting on Kodachrome, which is a Kodak product, Ilford Cibachrome was the perfect way to get the best colour out of them. So that was my fellowship panel, or the box for it anyway. And I include this for two reasons, really. One, because the panel was successful and it was featured in the photographic journal. But in those days, the only colour in the journal was on the cover. My entire colour portfolio of Kodachrome originals with printed on Cibachrome were reproduced in black and white in the journal, apart from the cover. And that's my certificate on the right. I want you to keep the certificate in your mind, because I'm going to come back to the certificate. I'd be very interested to have your view on something there. So at the Trust, I explained that one of the excavations was Coppergate in the middle of York, near to what was the AB, or underneath what was the ABC cinema. Coppergate was a Viking Age excavation. And the figures that the Trust before my time there built the Jorvik Viking Centre, and it populated the Viking Centre with model figures, fiberglass figures of Viking Age people doing Viking Age things, like this fish gutter on the left. But when I was at the Trust, there was a development that was happening at University College Hospital in London, to reconstruct faces by scanning the skull. It was a guy called Robin Richards who was developing this technique, and he wanted some historic skulls. So I went down to London, took some Viking Age skulls with me, and we recreated the figure on the right, obviously a similar pose to the one on the left, but this one is the recreation of somebody's face using their actual skull. And it was so innovative at the time that National Geographic picked the story up and published it. So that then became my first picture in National Geographic, which was just used once as a news item. But it led to other work as well, which was fantastic. So it was a win-win for me, was that. But more to the point, the work that I did with the Trust on exhibition design led me in a completely different direction to photography. And I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's certainly been very good to me professionally, has that change of career. But creatively, I don't know. I think the jury's still out on that one. I'm still more passionate about photography than I am about anything else, including exhibition design, but I do enjoy exhibition design. Anyway, that's another story. What happened when I was at the Trust was that once we'd done that recreation of the Viking, the Trust decided that it was going to completely redo the Jorvik Viking Centre, taking out these old figures that you can see in the photograph on the right, and repopulating the Viking Centre with the new figures created from real Viking burials that we'd found in York. So I offered to get some rugby guys and rip out the old exhibition, and struck a deal with the Trust. Rather than them put all this exhibition into landfill, I would buy it from them for £1, and all they would have to do is give me and my mates access to the Viking Centre during the night, because we all had day jobs, for 2 weeks. And we would rip everything out and give them an empty shell. And the deal was that I could then do what I wanted with the old Viking Centre, but I couldn't do it in what was the EC, or the EU now, or then. Now the EU. I had to take it, if I was going to exhibit it anywhere, it had to be outside the EU. So I went to Iceland and I hired a car in Reykjavik, and I did the #1 road all the way around the island, stopping at every museum, trying to sell them the old Jorvik Viking Centre. And it was getting towards the end of my 1-week trip, and I hadn't sold it. I just think they just didn't believe it. But I got to a place called Hafnarfjörður, which is just outside Reykjavik. So if you go to Iceland, you land at Keflavik, which is was the American air base, and then you drive into Reykjavik. Well, Hafnarfjörður is halfway between the international airport at Keflavik and Reykjavik city. And Hafnarfjörður Museum said, oh yeah, great. We've got a big warehouse that we don't know what to do with. Yes, we'll rebuild the Jorvik Viking Centre there. We'll buy it from you. So we put it into 3 of these 40-foot containers on the left, wrapped up all the figures, took everything over to Iceland, and 4 of us, myself and, 5 of us, sorry, myself and four guys from the rugby club, went to rebuild the Jorvik Viking Centre in Hafnarfjörður. And partway through, they decided not to buy it, but to rent it for the same money as buying it. But we had to then go back and take it out again. And at that point, the 5 years had elapsed that was the limit for me to put it in the EU. And we then did sell it to Sweden. So that was a very good commercial deal for me. But it helped me set up a company called Vidar Media, which is an exhibition design company. And since 1997, I've been almost exclusively working on museum design projects. And this was the fork in the road, and I took one fork down museum design and pretty much ignored photography, which was uncomfortable for me, but I did sort of find the way back again later. I'll show you how I did that in a minute. But just to look at some of the projects that we've done and how photography's helped in that. The 4 projects here: the Royal Lincolnshire Regiment, which is at the Museum of Lincolnshire Life in Lincoln, the Ruskin Museum, which is at Coniston. When we sold the Jorvik to Iceland, we got a huge amount of press coverage in Iceland, and that meant that I was getting invitations to design and build exhibitions in Iceland. So we set up a company there called Gagna Gammon, which I've since sold, and we did Orkiverithjörð, which is Orkiverithjörð means power station Earth, and we built this on the site of a geothermal power station. We've also done the National Football Museum, and that was my most difficult project because I know nothing about football, have no interest in football whatsoever, much to the embarrassment of my daughter who loves football. But thankfully we got people that knew about that game, so that we were all right. Some more of the projects, with Waterford Treasures in Ireland, Spike Island, which is Ireland's Alcatraz, that won the World Travel Awards Best New Project, World Project in 2017. And we've had a lot of success in Ireland, and so set up a company there, Vidar Media Ireland, to do projects while still working in Iceland as well. And the most surprising, I think, projects that we did were some projects for the Woodland Trust at Chelsea Flowershare, where anybody who knows me will know I'm not a gardener, but we had to design these woodland gardens for the Woodland Trust, and we won bronze medal, silver gilt and silver medals for those projects, which amazes me even now that we managed to do that. So photography was still part of this venture into museum design. I won the project, the contract to put the Doomsday Book and Magna Carta on display at the Public Record Office in Kew. We had to build a bomb-proof room for it because of the IRA attempt to destroy Doomsday Book in the early 70s, I think. So we had to do this effectively this bomb shelter for it, but we also had to photograph Doomsday Book, which was an incredible privilege to photograph Doomsday Book and Magna Carta, and that led to a commission from the Public Record Office to photograph their excuse me, their principal collection, which has all manner of things in there. Just amazing what it's got. An unclaimed Waterloo medal from a soldier that never wanted his medal. Edward's letter of abdication, top left there. A postcard from Jack the Ripper to the police, and the one in the middle, the typewritten document there, that's the Argentinian surrender from the Battle of Falklands. Falklands War. Just an amazing collection, really superb. So I spent a few weeks down there just photographing these wonderful, wonderful items. And for somebody who's interested in history, it was, quite a dream job, really. But that's also carried through to other projects that we've done. We've done a lot of work in Tyne and Wear museums at Preston Park, things like that. So I photograph collections up there. But my job through the Irish company, the Icelandic company and the UK company has taken me overseas more times than I care to remember. And I was contracted by UNESCO to work during the Homeland War in the former Yugoslavia. And that led to other UNESCO project work as well. So I've been fortunate to travel to loads of these World Heritage sites, which is now a sort of long-term photographic project for me. One that I'll never finish. I keep adding them to the list, which is great, but I'll never get through even 5% of them, let alone all of them. So I need a collaborator on that, if anybody's interested. So to some of my own work then. England in particular was a book that a charity called the Common Ground Trust published. And it's an encyclopedic catalogue of things that are quintessentially English, but it's illustrated very sparsely by line illustrations. There are no photographs at all, but it's a fantastically interesting book, which I picked up in a remaindered bookshop for just £2 or £3, but it got me thinking. And it got me thinking at the time that I was teaching some MA students about portrait photography, and we were looking at the work of Arnold Newman, who did this book called The Great British. And I thought this is such a contrast. The Great British, you've got politicians, military leaders, peers, scientists, doctors, all sorts of people who are the truly great British, but there are no commoners in there. Whereas if you look at England in particular, this is essentially the common, as it says on the cover, the commonplace. And I wanted to combine both genres, really, this historical and encyclopedic catalogue of things that are quintessentially English, and combine it with a photographic style, this environmental portraiture, if you like, that Newman had on the Sunday Times project, The Great British. And that led to a project called The English in Particular, where I photographed people for each of the entries in the England in Particular book, or at least one from each alphabet letter. Now, if anybody watched Have I Got News For You on Friday and saw the guy with the giant cabbage, was it cabbage or cauliflower? Giant cauliflower, who had the record for the world's biggest potato until it was beaten by somebody else. Well, that's him in the middle of the top row, Peter Glazebrook with a giant onion. So he was one of the things in the England in Particular book is giant vegetables, and that people growing them is apparently a quintessentially English thing. So I chose to photograph him, and this was a series that I did for that. Now, one of those photographs, back to York again, was photographed at York Cemetery, because under the letter G, there's graveyards. So one of the oldest graveyards that I know locally is York Cemetery. So I went over there, arranged it beforehand, and said, could I photograph the groundsman at the graveyard at the cemetery? And they said, yeah, come along, no problem. So whilst across there, as I said earlier, I love the square format. I love shooting on film even now. Still shoot a lot on, probably about 30% on film. And this was shot with a Hasselblad 503, I think, as a CWD, and photographed them there. And I entered it in the International Art Portrait Photographer of the Year competition in 2017, and it won. And I thought, oh, goodness me, look, this is great. I'm really enjoying myself photographing these people. I got success in this competition. Thought I've got to get back into photography somehow and really sort of start doing photography again. I'd never given it up, but photographing museum artifacts is one thing. Photographing people is just, something else completely. And it's much more the editorial photography that I wanted to do. So at that point, we were living between Iceland and Ireland and sort of flitting between the two, mostly in Ireland. And we decided to move back to the UK with Brexit on the horizon. My wife's dual English Irish, but I'm English, so it would have been difficult to have been living there. So I thought, right, we'll go back to the UK and I'll look for a project that I could take to sort of set myself up again as an editorial photographer. We moved back to Yorkshire, and for those of you that live in Yorkshire, you'll know about the Great Yorkshire Show. I approached them and said, look, I'm an editorial photographer, I'm just moving back to the UK. Could I come and photograph behind the scenes at the Yorkshire Show? They set up a meeting, so I took some of my Gamma work for the Gamma agency, and they loved it and said, yeah, come and do it. So they gave me a gold pass, which meant I could go anywhere behind the scenes, into the public areas, into the farm areas, and cover everything. And they liked the work so much that they said, all right, we'll pay to publish it as a book, and Princess Anne will write the foreword and the Duke of Devonshire will write the preface. I thought, this is fantastic, brilliant. So that's what we did, and we published this book. And that started off my editorial photography career again, back in 2018. So what I'm going to do now to sort of wind this up, we've got 4 minutes left or so, then we've got 15 minutes for questions. I'm just to look at one project from each of the years since the Yorkshire Show was in 2018. So let's start there and look at one project per year, bring us up to date. So in 2018, there was the People's Vote March in London, which I went to photograph. I wasn't commissioned. It was just me going down there thinking, right, it's a big event. It's obviously of national and European, if not global significance. I'll go and photograph it. And I managed to sell the pictures privately at the end of it through to a media company. And these are some of the photographs from that project, or that one-day project anyway. Then got commissioned in 2019. The UCI Road World Cycling Championships took place in a very, very wet Yorkshire. You could not have had worse weather for an outdoor cycling event. And I got commissioned to do that. And this was used by UCI Media on their media stream. What's on there? Sorry, caught the wrong button. There, I think we're back to normal. So yeah, this was used by UCI Media. And here are some more photographs from that. And at this time I was shooting on, Canon 5D Mark IVs and 1DXs. And I daren't take the 5D4s out in the rain, in this rain anyway. So I shot on the 1DXs and they were fantastic. Water was just dripping off me everywhere. And the cameras just worked perfectly. It was only for the 2 years that I used Canon cameras because of a deal I did with another agency. Before that, right from the early days, I was on Nikon, and then when the deal ended, I went back to Nikon. So now I'm on D5s and D6s, waiting for the Z9. If any of you are Nikon users, I'm sure you know what I mean by that. So 2020 then, I got commissioned by Triangle Media to do a shoot of Sophie Bailey. Now, Sophie Bailey classes herself as a game entrepreneur. And what she does is goes around corporate pheasant shoots and gathers up the carcasses. Now, because corporate shoots, people pay to kill the birds, they usually get a kill when the bird is quite close to the gun, which means they get full of lead, and they're useless to sell to a butcher because there's too much lead, too much shot in the bird, and they take too much dressing. So she goes around and gathers them up and pays them very little. Often she'll get paid to take the dead birds away, and she plucks them, takes the meat off, which is of course still full of lead, and mashes it up, centrifuges it to get the lead out, so she ends up just with sort of pulverized flesh, pheasant flesh, and she uses that to make things like coq au vin, but pheasant au vin, chili con carne, but not beef, but with pheasant, and things like that, spaghetti bolognese, but not with beef, with pheasant, and she packages it up and sells it on. Now, this agency in London called Triangle Media said, "Oh, we've a story in this. We could sell this story. Let's get it covered." So I include this job just to show you what is involved in getting a photograph for a newspaper. So when you go and do the shot, you've got to do the long shot, which is the full length. You've got to do portrait, the middle one. You've got to do a long shot, which is a bit more suggestive of what she's about or what the subject's about, a bit more rather than straight on at camera. You've got to do the real cheesy shot, you know, look at me, look, this is what I make, which you think they'll never use, but they always want it. The finished shot to show the end of the editorial, the end of the narrative, what's the end result. So it's the one in the middle here. Part of the processing on the left there. She does this work in her garage. And you've got to do what's known as filler shots. So when they do the page design, whether it's a newspaper, a magazine, or Country Life or something like that, they might end up with a small space that they haven't got enough text to fill and they can't get a picture to fit in it. So you drop a filler shot in. So it's either this one jettisoning the cartridges or the one on the right, which is the gun on the pheasants. And just to show how it was used, I mean, my favorite shot from the whole shot, the whole brief was the whole shoot was that portrait on the left of Sophie. Long distance shot. It was a 200mm f2, wide open, very, very little depth of field. And it was a dull day, so just soft muted tones. The Daily Mail, yes, they used the cheesy shot of, hey, look what I've made. And the shot of her walking towards us, a couple of other shots. But the Telegraph went for my favorite shot, which is great. But look at the color, what a mess. It was no way it was that much color in the original, and they really ramped up the color, which is a great shame. But anyway, that's what you've got to live with, as long as they pay at the end of the day. Okay, bang up to date now, 2021, COP26. Had to go up to COP to photograph that. I sell images now through Getty, iStock. Stock photography, and I'm slowly getting onto their editorial Getty News images through Getty Images. So this was a job for that. This is the most popular shot that I took from COP26, which is the Global Day of Action. And these are some others. The guy on the left was the Young Communists League, a member of the Young Communists League, and the march that went through Glasgow was done in blocks. And the communists were a block on their own. And there were about 100 of them with red flags and red flares and red masks. Really great, photographer's dream, really. But there were 2 rows of police all around this block. So the whole thing was continuously framed by police all the way around. So I had to shoot through the police to get this sort of a shot. The guy on the right, he was running to join the procession, the parade, and I stopped him and I said, "Oh, can I take your photograph?" He said, "Why? Why do you want to take a picture of me? Have you not seen an Asian with a salter, a Scottish flag before?" I said, "Oh no, it's nothing to do with that." So I said, "It's just yellow and blue are complementary colours, and you just look so great with the yellow and blue." He said, "Oh right, yeah, fine, do it." So I took the picture and off he ran. I still like it. It hasn't sold, but I still think it's a great picture. This shot on the left is the sort of stock picture that Getty goes for, so that's just to show that. The picture on the right would definitely not sell, and I actually haven't put this into Getty, but this is one I took for myself. I just couldn't resist the policeman with the black mask, obviously not to conceal his identity, but just to, you know, because of COVID, all the police had masks on. This guy used a sort of neck warmer up as his mask, but I just couldn't resist photographing him masked up in front of a hammer and sickle. It might have a use somewhere, but I can't imagine where. Anyway, that's sort of the end of my work, brings me bang up to date. Just a couple of other photographs that I want to show you that when I decided to sort of reinvent myself as an editorial photographer again in 2017, I entered the Professional Photographer of the Year competition, and this is a photograph the photograph that won that for me. And there's a sort of link to museums here, because I've been working for this guy, who's a friend of mine, is James Graham, who lives to the other side of Ripon at Norton Conyers, and I've been doing a lot of work for him over several years. And I said, "Oh, James, can I photograph you?" And he said, "Yes, of course, yeah." It was his birthday, and his wife had bought him this tartan jacket of the Graham tartan. So he was very proud to be photographed in that. And it was just a photograph I took for him and for me, entered it, and with a portfolio of lots of other work, got me that competition win, which was great. And another win was the BIPP Portrait Photographer of the Year, which is, we'd done some work for the Chatsworth estate. They were going very environmentally friendly with their heating of the of Chatsworth House with a biomass burner. And this guy is the head forester for the Chatsworth estates at Chatsworth House in Derbyshire. And there was just a photograph that I took of him when we'd finished the walk around the forest to get the sort of photographs of the forest for the exhibition. I said, oh, can I take your photograph? And he said, yeah, fine, go ahead. So just shot that, and that got me Portrait Photographer of the Year in 2019. So wasn't trying for these at all, and it just happens, just taking that shot whenever it presents itself. Last now then, some personal projects. I started this project a long time ago. I'm trying to go through as many of the English calendar customs, things that happen on the same date every year around England. I'd love to do Britain, but just traveling is not as easy to get up to the north of Scotland for something like up Heliar, for example. So we've got Royal Swan Upping on the Thames in the middle, Appleby Horse Fair in the middle there, sorry, Swan Upping on the left, Appleby Horse Fair in the middle, and the Britannia Coconut Dancers on the right. So they're just three of them that I'm doing for that. Lockdown, of course, happened last year, as we all know. So I decided to use my long dog walks with Oscar Barnack in the middle, who's named after the guy who invented the Leica. And we decided to go and visit all the Ordnance Survey trig points on a map of, with my house in the middle, whatever would fit on an Ordnance Survey map. I decided to go and visit them with Oscar. He had no say in the matter, but he did come with me. And we went and photographed them all. And my wife has nominated me for something which I never knew existed, but apparently is a real club called the Dull Men's Club, because she said anybody that can just go to every trig point within so many miles of home should be a member. And apparently it's real. And I then found out that when I got involved with the Dull Men's Club, Peter Glazebrook, who's the guy that grows the giant vegetables, he's one of their longest standing members. So I'm in good company. Lots of dull men together. Not that I'm saying that Peter Glazebrook is dull at all. So my second lockdown project, and I've seen my partner in crime in the audience here with Regina. Regina and I are both members of Harrogate Photographic Society, and Regina very kindly baked for me and for many, many other people a sourdough loaf. And not only did she bake it for me, she delivered it to the house while it was still warm. We got chatting at 2 meters distance, of course. And she was telling me about the history of sourdough and all sorts of things. I said, wouldn't it be great if we could do a book about, or a project, photography project, about foods that have a historical story to them? So Regina being Regina, went home, and within 24 hours had got a list of recipes that she was prepared to make, and I would photograph in the studio that I've got here. So that's what we did. We started off bottom left, as you can see, wearing masks and trying to keep a distance. It's very difficult when you're working on an intimate set of food. But we did the book, published it just in time for Christmas last year, called History on Your Plate by Regina Wilkinson, who is in our audience tonight. So if you want any copies, speak to Regina. It was a great project, and she was very kindly left a lot of the food in the studio when she went home. So well, I had a great lockdown, actually. Bring it on. Another lockdown project. I live in the middle of the forest, what was the Royal Hunting Forest of Knaresborough. So I'm walking all the bridle ways and public footpaths and photographing every footpath, a sort of typical photograph of each one, with Oscar Barnack, of course, again. So I also have time to teach photography. As I said at the beginning, I taught myself photography, O-level, but now I teach GCSE at a couple of schools in North Yorkshire, and I teach A-level, it's another school, and I teach undergrads at BA and postgrads at MA at Leeds College and at Harrogate College, and soon to be another college as well. And these on the right are some of my GCSE students from St Aidan's School in Harrogate, who thankfully love shooting film. So we do lots of film work, and we've got a session tomorrow as well. So to finish, these are the newly elected trustees, 6 of them, and myself. We, as you know, as you RPS members, we had an election in September. The results were announced at the AGM, and these are the 6 trustees. We now have to appoint 5 more trustees, which are done on a skills gap analysis. So we look at the skills that these 7 have, find out what's missing, and then we go and find trustees to fill those gaps. We don't limit ourselves to RPS members, although if we find somebody that brings skills that we feel we need, they will have to become RPS members before they can become a trustee. They won't get free membership. They'll still have to pay membership, because being a trustee can have no benefits, financial benefits, but there are other benefits, and I'll talk about those in a minute. So just to show this diagram, because I use this in a different presentation to trustees and to regional organisers and things, it just shows the structure of the RPS. And you know, we forget sometimes how complex the organisation is. You know, we look at our own groups or our regions, but it's so much more than that, and it's quite a beast to manage. But it's great fun doing it, and we've got a fantastic board of trustees now that are really sort of got the bit between the teeth, and we're sort of really going to run with that. This is the strategy, which you've probably seen ad nauseum. I know I have. That is really our focus. So our next meeting is a deep dive into the strategy with the senior leadership team to try and to push this strategy out and make sure that we really do deliver on this over the next of the life of the current council, which is for the next 3 years. But I mentioned there are benefits of being president of the RPS. This is one of them, being present at the selection for photographs for the International Photography Exhibition, which is now in its 163rd edition. And it's the oldest and longest running photographic exhibition in the world, which Michael Pritchard on the right always reminds me. Not that I need reminding, but it was great to see these sort of specialist curators discussing every photograph and really putting an enormous amount of effort and knowledge into selecting the images. So that IPE is being framed at the moment and will be on display at an RPS house near you soon. Another thing I needed to do this year was to attend and deliver an address to a private view of the Generations Portraits of Holocaust Survivors exhibition, which is an RPS project inspired by the editor of Jewish News, that our patron, the Duchess of Cambridge, has been involved in this right from the outset and is also a contributing photographer to it. But I was also able to photograph some of the people that had been photographed with their photographs. So that was quite a privilege. And also, I was able to photograph the largest gathering of Holocaust survivors in the UK in recent years. And since this was taken in October, 4 of them have died. So this photograph can't be repeated. And while I was there, Arthur Edwards, who I'd first met, I'd stood next to him at the wedding of Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson when he was on the Royal Rota and I was there for local news in York. And that's when I first met him, and I've kept in touch with him since. But I was able to award him with his fellowship certificate at the event with the Holocaust survivors. And behind him, behind Lou Lawrence, the girl in the middle, the lady in the middle, is the photograph that Arthur took of Ziggy Shipper, the guy on the right, who's a Holocaust survivor, for the exhibition. So it was a really nice way of bringing everything together, and I was really pleased that I was able to present it to him as I'd sort of, you know, stood at the side of him years ago. But this is where I want you to think about the fellowship certificate. The one on the right is the fellowship certificates that were awarded in the 90s. And the one that Arthur's getting is the fellowship certificate that you get today. So when I finish in about 90 seconds time, I'd be interested to know whether you would prefer to get a certificate that looks like the one on the right, with the seal of the society on their ornate lettering that tells you what category you got your fellowship in, or whether you get that one, which I think looks a bit too minimal. Doesn't really look like a fellowship certificate, but I might stand corrected. We'll find out soon enough. This week, no, not this week, sorry, last week, Wednesday of last week, the Duchess of Cambridge visited the Imperial War Museum to formally open the new Holocaust gallery and to promote the the Generations exhibition, the RPS exhibition. So I was representing the RPS there. I was also photographing the arrival of the Duchess. So I grabbed the shot top right of her arriving, and then needed to go round through the back door to get into line for coming in at the other side. We managed it, but it was a bit of a rush. I was the only photographer in a suit, by the way. Everybody else was in jeans and waterproofs. So that's it, the end. So if I stop sharing, I think we started with 30 people. And we've still got 30. Have I stopped sharing?
Well, there's been a little up and down, but yeah, great. You did say you'd stop and breathe, and I might ask a few questions, but you never breathed.
Sorry, no, sorry about that.
But not a problem.
I've stopped now. I'm breathing now. Honest.
Yeah. So really, just a couple of comments in here from Michael Clevery, who's actually one of the ones who had to come and go. But he's said he wants to watch the video when it's all over. But he was very disappointed that the human skull in that LRPS photo was not a random discovery from a murder scene.
Yeah, well, I was a schoolboy. I think it was a real skull. The questions would have been asked in the headmaster's office. So, but yeah, well, it wasn't real. The Beaver Skull was real in the fellowship picture.
Yes, with real glue.
With real glue, yeah.
Yeah, so please ask questions, folks, if you have any. I've got a few that I've been collecting. Now, one of them you answered at the end, or almost at the end, because perhaps a bit like me interviewing people for roles, I spotted a gap in your career when you mentioned about teaching, but you explained that at the end, that that's something you're now doing.
I've always taught. When I graduated, I got an HND in photography from Blackpool. It was a 3-year course, but I've left after 2 years. I didn't do the professional qualifying exam because I got a job to do some photography work for UNESCO, and I wanted to do that, so I left early. But then I resumed my education with an MA at St Martin's after that, and that's when I began teaching. And then I began to teach on the degree course. But although I'd got an MA, the college wanted me to have a degree, so I then did a degree, a BA in photography at the Open College of the Arts, the OCA. They invited me to become a trustee, which is how I got involved with being a trustee. And when the RPS asked for trustees, I applied. But I've taught right from getting my HND in different ways. So
that's good. So you've very much got a stake in the game when it comes to thinking about qualifications and perhaps what the RPS distinctions mean. You know, in my other professional career, I'm an engineer, and of course the engineering institutions, their qualifications really are, legally binding. For practicing, you have to have various things and be on the Engineering Council's register. So do you think there's any potential of future equivalency of distinctions and the kind of memberships you might get from other professional institutions which actually have a more formal meaning? Yeah,
I think there are. I think that might be a loaded question, but I'll answer it anyway. One of the things I wanted to introduce when I became a trustee 2 years ago was a chartered designation for photographers. And the reason I wanted to do that is because we've got the Royal Photographic Society, which is a learned society, which has professional members, professional photographers who are members, but it's not a professional organisation. Then there's the British Institute of Professional Photography, photographers, which is a professional body. We've got the Master Photographers Association, which was a breakaway. We've got the Association of Photographers, which used to be the Association of Fashion Advertising and Editorial Photographers, which is another breakaway. We've then got the Guild of Photographers. We've then got the Societies of Photographers. So there's all these different organisations, and there's a lot of noise in the marketplace, and there's nowhere that you can really identify and say, well, what is the definitive qualification for a professional photographer? And this was perhaps more important pre-Brexit, when it was easier to work in Europe to have that chartered status. So I contacted the BIPP, contacted the AOP, the Association of Photographers, and we agreed that we would work together on creating proposals for a chartered photographer designation. Because it's a protected term as chartership, it had to go to the Privy Council. Privy Council, fortunately, is the organisation that is the ultimate governing body over the RPS. And Michael Pritchard and I wrote the regulations for that. Trustees at the time reviewed it and gave a lot of input to it, which was great. We had a really good board of trustees that were very, we had so much to do, you know, from 2019 to 2021. It was a very difficult time, but we got that through. We got lots of other things through too, including the strategy. That's currently with the Privy Council. So watch this space on that. But I think we'll get there.
That's good to hear. Yeah, definitely. It was actually also some things that I learned. The editorial photography, you know, hidden in that discussion of your career, actually taught us quite a lot about doing editorial photography. So thank you for that. That's something I've not done before. I might actually think about how I can use some of the photographs I take of the events in the village where I live and put them together in that style.
Yeah, it's not difficult. It's just telling the story through photographs.
Indeed. Yeah.
It's only like creating a panel, really, but you don't have any say in how the panel's put together on the page. And of course, the statement of intent is usually much longer in an editorial piece. You know, I love taking photographs to illustrate words, whether they're my words or somebody else's words, or words that I know are going to be written about an event. So when I'm photographing editorially, I'm always trying to think, what is the slant that the writer is going to take, and make sure that I've given them a spread of photographs that will serve that purpose. And also there's an opportunity in editorial photography that if you know the slant the writer's going down, if something happens in that event, or if you feel that there's an alternative narrative to be delivered, then you can shoot for that as well, and perhaps try and influence it that way.
Yes.
But not at the expense of where the writer wants to go. It's got to be something you offer in addition.
Clear.
Otherwise, you're not going to get paid.
Always important.
Yes,
it's useful to offer alternative viewpoints as well. Yeah. Now, we've got a question here from David Lane. There's been some chatter recently that the statement of intent for F and A distinctions is carrying more weight almost than the images. What's your view on that?
Well, I suppose I've answered it partly. I don't have problems with statements of intent. I know some photographers do. All photographs, every photograph that we take is saying something, and I think as photographers we need to be able to interpret narratives through photography, either pre-written narratives or post-written narratives, and use the photographer to inspire it. I don't think writing a statement of intent and the photographer's ability to write should be judged, but I do think a statement of intent is important when you're looking at a collection of images, because you need to know what the photographer was intending with those images. Sometimes it's straightforward, sometimes it's in your face. You don't need to read the statement of intent. You know exactly what's being narrated through the photographs. I think a more relevant question, no disrespect to David, but would be, is there an alternative way of presenting photographs other than as a panel of 20 photographs in 2 rows, which I think is a bit prescriptive. I know we've got the book, photo book genre now, which is great. Really want to see that developing. But I think there are so many other ways of presenting imagery, like on a Twitter feed, or a Facebook feed. Why don't you present a Facebook feed as a distinctions application? I think we're being a bit too restrictive in what we tell photographers to do to get a distinction. It seems such a shame to bridle.
I think that's very forward-looking, thinking in an open way, because they're, the future of all organizations is younger people joining them and being very much engaged. So how many younger folks are printing images and putting them in panels? Whilst it's a skill we need to encourage, but do they do it?
No, well, none of my students do anyway. Well, apart from what
putting together websites, perhaps.
Website. Why can't you get a distinctions for a website, a photographic website? Why not? It's only publishing in another medium, isn't it? Another channel.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I think there's a lot to be done there. But we'll get there. We'll get there. It's might not be an easy route to go travel along, but we'll get there, I think, one way or another.
Right. So
what about the certificates then? Do you like the older style? Do you like the newer style?
Anybody put some comments in there? The way you asked that was kind of loaded. That
I see Janet's here. She'll know I've got
my 2 cents on that is I like clean fonts. I don't like scratchy pen looking fonts because that's BS. But actually having a seal is a real thing, right? So that maybe makes it more of a certificate. I was thinking, do I have time to go rummage in my cupboards and go and look for my certificates from my engineering career and go and look to see what they looked like? There's several people here saying old style, love the seal.
No, that's Wendy G. Davis. Yes, old style, love the seal. Reminds me of my degree certificates. I like this.
Wow.
Colin, I like the seal. David, old style. Need to look at the best elements from each certificate. Karen Hall. That's a very sensible answer. That's very good.
Well, certainly, Simon.
Carol Pavlova, Australian. You need to contact Regina. Yes, Pavlova, Australian. You contact Regina. I asked her the same question, but I was told. Is Regina still here? Yeah. No.
Yes. Alan, do you want to?
I try to type a message. It's obviously I'm missing something. Oh, okay. I've written to Carol.
Oh, you have? Oh, thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
Brilliant. Thanks. Yeah. Any other questions? Is that what you just said, Sean?
Yeah, it's 12 minutes past. We've used a lot of your time. Thank you very much for that.
Talk too much then.
No, you haven't, Simon. You've talked. Very entertaining evening. Thank you very much for that.
Good. Very welcome.
Let me just put up the closing slide.
Is there a closing slide?
There is.
Oh, there is a closing.
Oh, you
slide.
have a closing slide, right? Okay.
Yes. Just try and get the Zoom thing to work for me. That's the trouble. Right, hang on. Share screen. That helps. Share that screen. We'll do that. And we'll do that. Hopefully now you can see the slide. The slide.
No.
Oh, that's exciting.
Shall I do it, Sam?
Zoom doesn't work like Teams. It wants me to do 2 things at once. There we are.
There you go. Next slide.
Now we've got the hang of it.
Well, I have to say, next month, yes, we've got Len Metcalf who talked at the AGM.
Yeah.
And it's not quite it's going to be an updated rerun of his AGM talk. He said he missed some things when he was talking. But I'm really looking forward to that. And I think it deserved a wider audience that it got at the AGM. So try it again. Can I just say thank you to Simon and apologies to everybody for me dropping in and out because I've got problems with my internet. I'll shoot somebody at OpenReach very soon. Thank you very much, Simon, and thank you, Sean, for taking over the reins of running the show because of my inability to stay online all the time. But thank you very much again, Simon and Sean and everyone for joining us tonight. And I look forward to seeing you at next month's, which note is on a Saturday morning at 10 o'clock because we have to cope with Len actually having his talking to us at 9 p.m. his time. So we've shifted it to a Saturday morning. So see you all then, folks, and thank you very much again, Simon.
Definitely worth the effort. He's a great speaker.